Welcome back. I know it has been a while since the last update, but as I mentioned in the last video, things are going to slow down a little bit around here. So far we had a very cold winter with a lot of snow in the last month, which always keeps me busy in one way or the other. And I also built some custom furniture last couple of weeks. I took some days off and of course I worked on a boat as well. And that's what this video is about, so let's jump right into it. As you probably can tell by the title, this video is specifically all about the bed. Now, planning and building a bed for a camper or a tiny houseboat in this case is quite a challenging task, and that's because there's one major problem: it takes up a ton of space. A popular solution for that is to create a seating area that can convert into a bed. That usually involves putting down your table, play Tetris with all the cushions, and then pull out the cover and your pillows and blankets, and then try to sleep on those terrible foam blocks, which is easier said than done. And trust me, I speak from experience. This picture is from the motorhome that I used to live in. They're ridiculously uncomfortable, and because they are puzzled together, you feel like you're about to disappear in a giant butt crack. I'm getting old and lazy. I want to sleep comfortable. I don't want to make my bed every single day for 15 minutes, so that option is out. And to install a bed permanently for two is not really an option either, because I only have 120 square foot of floor space available here. But there's one solution, and that is a raised bed, or in other words, a bed that can be lifted right under the ceiling, and therefore doesn't require a single square foot of floor space, which then of course can be used for other things. Okay, now let's see how this would look like in this boat. With the idea of a raised bed in mind, I made sure I had plenty of headspace in the center when I was working on the framing. 97.5 inches is what I have to work with, that's just over 8 feet. And in my ideal world, the bed would be positioned as far to the front as possible. That way the majority of the space, including the small bathroom, are still accessible when the bed is in the lower position. Now let's pretend to raise the bed straight up vertically. Well, you can see where we have a problem. Of course I could duck down to get out of the front, but that's not really what I want to do. But if I angle the vector to 45 degrees and raise the bed now, I end up in a perfect position that allows me to comfortably walk up and down the stairs. Now I have to figure out how to do that. I really like to use Lego Technic to help me visualize a certain mechanism. It just helps to realize potential problems before you build stuff and waste material. And at this point I decided to use 4 arms in each corner of the bed to create a parallel motion linkage, which will allow me to have the bed positioned close to the front when lowered and moved 3 feet towards the back when raised. At this point I felt comfortable to start the construction and figure everything else out while I'm building. I'm not going to drag you through the process of milling all the lumber. It's just too boring, but it is worth mentioning that all of it is reclaimed wood, and just collecting and cutting everything to size took a day on its own. But it was worth it since I didn't pay a cent for the lumber. Now I started by assembling the outer rails, and I don't go for any fancy joinery here. I really try to keep it simple and functional. Just a couple screws here and there and some wood glue did the trick. Now since the bed frame is not going to sit on the ground, I needed it to be very stable and resistant to any torsion. So I decided to use the bed slats as structural members. Usually they sit horizontal in the frame, but I installed them vertically and screwed them in from both sides, which really stiffened up the entire frame. And by closing up the top and bottom in the center, I created basically a very stable hollow center beam. Now I did need a ton of brackets, and it's all made from 1/8 of an inch scrap steel, and I will try to keep that one short too. You guys know how to use an angle grinder and a drill press, and I'm sure you can imagine the work that went into that part. I had a couple pieces of Baltic birch plywood kicking around, and I laminated them together to create a 1-inch thick piece, and that gave me just enough material for the 4 arms that hold the bed. And with that I had most of the major components ready, so it was time to start the assembly. just playing with the movement here to make sure it actually works, and it looks promising. Now, I did put the bed frame on a scale before I hung it up, and it was only around 60 pounds, which is pretty light for a solid wood construction. Aluminum would have been another great material to build this, but I don't have the means to weld it, and besides that, aluminum is not cheap, so I was happy with what I got here. However, I wanted to get a feeling for the final weight, so I added this 40-pound dumbbell to simulate the weight of the mattress and the blankets, and then I used the crane scale to get a reading. I couldn't lift it up all the way while balancing on a bucket, but I got a reading of 47 kilogram, and I think it's safe to say it would have been around 50 kilogram or 110 pounds all the way up there. Which makes total sense, since 60 pounds for the frame, 40 pounds for the dumbbell, and around 10 pounds for half of the weight of the forearms equals 110 pounds. I made a couple brackets to hold some gas struts, and I was playing around for a while with different positions and different size struts. But pretty quickly it became obvious that that on its own will not work to support the movement enough to make this effortless. The reason why just gas struts don't work for this job is because the force that is needed to lift up the bed is not constant. It almost takes next to nothing to initiate the movement, but as close as you get up to the ceiling is more force you need. So that means even if I would be able to put in enough struts to cut that force down to a manageable amount, I basically would face the opposite problem at this point, because pulling it down and getting in an end position would be impossible by hand. So what can we do here? There are actually a ton of solutions for this, and the first thing that came into my mind were electric actuators. Would have been the most elegant solution too, but I had two problems with that. First of all, I would have needed 4 probably to make this work, and at that point you also need a synchronizer to make sure they work at the same time and the same speed. And all of that would have been really expensive. And also, you kind of rely now on a charged battery to go to bed, and that I didn't like. On second thought, I had an electric winch in mind, but I basically scrapped that idea for the same reasons. Now, just let me show you what I did instead. Alright, so a couple years ago I made a couple of those wooden steering wheels, and I'm really dying to finally use one of those. They're actually easier to build than they look like, and if you really want to know how to make those, just leave a comment in the comment section down below, and if there's enough interest I might make a video about it. Anyway, so the plan is to use the mechanical advantage that the wheel has to offer in combination with a pulley mounted to the bed frame, which will cut the remaining pull force in half. And after fiddling around for a while, I ended up with this setup. You probably noticed the white strap here. That's actually a seatbelt from a Toyota Sienna that I took apart years ago. It acts as a safety in case I let go of the steering wheel, or in case the cable breaks. As you know, when you pull hard on your seatbelt, it locks it in place. I did multiple tests, and the bed frame didn't swing fast enough to trigger it, but by looping it around the mount at the frame, I doubled up the speed in which the belt has to unspool, and that was fast enough to trigger it. I installed a whole bunch of things off camera. For example, I recycled this old broken clamp and used the steel to make a brace that can be set up once the bed is in a lower position. I also mounted some stop blocks just so the bed doesn't knock out the windows in the front when it swings down. And these little pull latches help to prevent movement and lock the bed in place in both positions. I also chopped up a dozen milk containers and melted them in a useful plastic sheet, which then donated material for some stop blocks. And of course I could have simply used wood for that, but this looks cooler. And last but not least, I installed some braces in the front, made from an old IKEA curtain rod. At this point I figured out all the details and everything worked pretty smoothly. So it was time to take it all apart again just to finish it. And that process was quite boring. Lots of sanding, grinding, painting and varnishing, and it took a couple days before I could reassemble everything. I really could talk for hours about this project because there's still so many ideas and solutions in my head, and theoretically there are still lots to explain when it comes to the reasons why I did things the way I did. But that's just too much for YouTube. That's already a long video. There was one solution though that is worth mentioning, because I think it's actually better than what I have right now when it comes to the lift system, so I will try to keep it short. Now, instead of using the wheel and pulleys to lift up the bed, a person could have used just one of those hand-powered worm gear winches. Now, those things are mechanically quite simple and yet genius. They can pull around 2,000 pounds, which is more than enough for this job. And the beauty about those things, no matter where and when you stop cranking, the cable doesn't just unspool, it stays right in place where you left it, which makes it very safe to operate. Because of the gear ratio, it would take forever, but it wouldn't take much to convert this so it can accept a battery-powered drill, and now it would be really comfortable. So that for sure would have been a really good option, but I just really wanted to use that wooden wheel. It just looks way cooler. Alright, I guess at this point it is time to show you the finished project in action. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your patience. I know it can be quite frustrating to wait that long for videos. It just takes a really long time to film stuff and to build stuff and to work on those videos. And of course I have a life beside the boat and YouTube. Anyways, no more delays, here it is.